from lovely Maple Grove, Minnesota, and 6footmama.com. This is Still Growing with Jennifer Ebling. Still Growing is a gardening podcast dedicated to helping you and your garden grow. Hi there, everyone, and welcome to Still Growing, and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling. In today's show, I'm sharing my conversation about organic potting soil with Mark Highland of Organic Mechanics. That's coming up after the Garden News Roundup. But first, I'd like to start out with a reminder about our Facebook group. It's free and easy to join. All you have to do is go to Facebook and search for the Still Growing Podcast group, and then just click to join. Or you can go to my website at 6footmama.com. That's the number 6. FTMAMA.com. It's also the home of the Still Growing podcast. And then right in the main menu, there's a link to the Facebook group. You'll see it right there. Just click on it. It'll take you right into the group, and then just click to join. And if you're listening to this episode and like what you hear, you should definitely join the group. Not only are there great giveaways for listeners, but in addition to sharing the Garden News Roundup and conversations about gardening, I'm planning to organize some meetups at public gardens around the United States this summer. So if you're not yet a member of the listener community on Facebook, I'd love for you to join for free. Just head over to the Facebook group, and it's called Still Growing Podcast Group. Just search for that, and it'll pop right up. Well, last week I mentioned that on the 20th of March, I had surgery for rotator cuff. So I batch produced this episode before I went into surgery, and I had a few new members of the group that I still needed to recognize. So I want to officially welcome them now. I want to welcome Nancy Williams, Mary Waxman, Christopher Wary, Stacy Bradfield, John Lang, Molly Braley, Eric Doss, Brooke Morin, Michelle Hamilton, Sandra Hayes, Mark Miley, and Owen Rogers. Welcome, you guys. You know, in addition to the listeners that are part of the Facebook group, the guests of the show are also invited to be part of the group in the hopes that you can continue the conversation with them. So if you have questions that are the result of an episode, you can reach out to the guest and ask questions right in the Facebook group. And we've got a lot of great guests in the group already, like Jody McKee, Josh Volk of Compact Farms, Rick Sherman of Schoolyard Gardens, Jen McGinnis of Frau Zenny, just to name a few. There's a lot of guests that are members in the Facebook group, and I know that they're happy to interact. In fact, Megan Kane wrote an entire blog post in response to a listener question. So the guests are very responsive, and that's exactly what I'd hoped for. Well, let's get started with the Garden News Roundup. These are a handful of the curated posts that I've collected over the past week. They've all been shared in the free Facebook group. So if you hear something and you want to read the full article, no need to take notes. Just head on over to the Facebook group. You'll find everything you need there. I always start with a guest update, and the folks over at the Bee's Knees shared a great post in Facebook about the upcoming Dandelion Honey Pastry Chef Challenge. They shared in their post that bee expert Dr. Marla Spivak. She's a MacArthur Fellow and a McKnight Distinguished Professor in Entomology at the University of Minnesota Bee Lab. She's an international leader in bee health research, and she's done amazing things for bees and beekeepers. And she's going to be part of this evening coming up on April 26th. It's the Dandelion Honey Pastry Chef Challenge. And if I'm feeling up to it, I just might pop over and check it out myself. It sounds super fun. And then former guest Lori Neverman of Common Sense Homesteading recently shared her Rhubarbade and Strawberry-Rhubarbade drink mixes. So this is a play on the word lemonade. Instead, it's rhubarbade. So she does one that's made with rhubarb just by itself, and then another drink that's made with strawberry and rhubarb. Now, I had never heard of making drinks with rhubarb before, but it's a real thing. In fact, I could tell from the comments on this post that people have been trying this for a while. Rhubarb offers true health benefits, In fact, I was just at Great Harvest Bakery and I bought this rhubarb crumble that they had made, and I'm giving it to my mom for her birthday. Just a sweet little treat I can add in her gift bag. Anyway, lots of great tips in this post as well as in the comments. Don't forget to read the comments associated with this blog post. I thought they were all great. In sustainability is a post that was shared in The Guardian, and the headline says, "Home cooks have an enormous potential to beat food waste," and this includes produce. So the point of this article is how to learn and appreciate leftovers. And from a historical standpoint, some of Britain's most iconic dishes were conceived from what was left behind, from leftovers in the kitchen. It's a great little article. In Continuing Ed this week, House Beautiful shared 9 tips for growing the perfect peonies. This was a nice, comprehensive article. If you're growing peonies and need a quick overview, this would be a great article for you. In the How-To DIY segment, there were a lot of articles that made this segment. I had to really cull through a lot of them. Spring is all about how-to, it seems. The first one was featured on Pop Sugar. It shares 7 ingenious ways to update your backyard for spring. It has ideas like painting your patio, incorporating a privacy trellis. The one I loved the most was installing AstroTurf on your deck. You've got to see that picture. That's pretty cool. Then Southern Living shared some before and after porch makeovers. These were all really great as well. And then Homify shared some patio ideas for low budgets. In the Plant Spotlight this week, My Domain shared an article called "This Season's Trendiest Flowers Are Also Edible." And it walks through all of the spring flowering blooms that are edible and a great way to dress up a salad. Love this one. In the news this week, NPR shared a story called "How to Make Farmers Love Cover Crops. Pay Them." This was featured on March 16th. I think it's very thought-provoking. So on a large scale, cover crops can also be helpful in terms of reducing runoff and restoring the land. But on a smaller scale, our gardens can benefit from cover cropping as well. And I talk about that in a previous episode with Sarah Griffin Bubakar of Peaceful Valley Grow Organic. So check that out if you're interested. In the Dream Guest segment, Mighty Axe Hops shared on Facebook that they had just spent a weekend at the Minnesota Hops Growers Association workshop, and they were especially fond of the wisdom of Stan Hieronymus. They said Stan is the hop knowledge champion, and he's the author of All You Need to Know About Hops. So Stan made my Dream Guest segment this week. I'd love to chat with Stan about growing hops. If Eric Sandrud says he's the champion, then he really must be the real deal. So that would be a great conversation to have. In Science this week, Aramco World shared an interesting article about walnuts and first forest farms. There's a lot of history and sociology woven into this piece, and I love anytime we have an intersection with gardening and history. That's always fascinating to me. For the shopping segment this week, I'm recommending a book. I think you'll love the book called Welcome to the Farm, How-To Wisdom from the Elliott Homestead. The Elliott Homestead has a great blog, and this book is a gem. It's a great starting point to create a food forest in your own backyard. So if you're looking for a new book to read, Welcome to the Farm would definitely be top of my list. And then finally, in the inspiration segment, RodalesOrganicLife.com shared an article called How Americans Gardened 260 Years Ago. So this is an article that features colonial Williamsburg. And it shows us that when it comes to gardening techniques, not much has changed. It's a fun read, and I thought you'd find it very inspirational, especially as you're planning your 2017 garden. Well, that's it for the Garden News Roundup this week. These are just a handful of the curated posts that I've collected, and they've been shared in the free Facebook group. So if you heard something and you want to see the full article or go to the source, you can just head over to the group. All the links are in the Facebook group, and it's free, so go check it out. Well, in today's show, I'm sharing my conversation about organic potting soil with Mark Highland of Organic Mechanics. Are you an organic gardener? Do you use organic potting soil? Back in 2006, the idea of organic potting soil would have been an emerging area in the world of horticulture, but it was a question and a concept that Mark Highland had been thinking about for a while. At that time, the market for U.S. specialty soils was $390 million. And in 2010, the entire U.S. garden market, including plants, soils, supplies, and tools, was worth about $100 billion. Now, Scott's Miracle-Gro was and still is the category leader. But there wasn't an organic alternative available on any sort of scale back in 2006. Back when Mark Highland had the idea for organic mechanics. So today I'm thrilled to share my chat with entrepreneur Mark Highland, who was an early innovator in developing environmentally sustainable potting soil. Well, hi, Mark. Welcome to Still Growing.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, it's a pleasure. Tell us a little bit about yourself. How do you end up being in charge of a company like Organic Mechanics? What's your personal story?
Yeah, so I started college thinking I was going to be a hot glass blower, like Dale Chihuly type glass blower.
Wow.
So I was going to art school for my sophomore year, and then actually made the switch to horticulture. And I stayed in Florida, and I had the scholarship to stay in Florida, so I found environmental horticulture at the University of Florida, and I thought, oh my gosh, that sounds so cool. You get to work with plants. I've always had a passion for the environment. I thought, environmental horticulture, that sounds amazing. So I went and crammed 3 years of school into 2 years, but just loved every minute of being in horticulture and learning about plants and how plants grow, and it was just fascinating, the whole plant world. And, from there, I did an internship at Callaway Gardens because I thought, maybe someday I did want to go back and get my master's. And I had my sights set on the Longwood graduate program, which is at the University of Delaware.
Okay.
From all my professors at the time, they were like, you should go get some experience. We've heard that the students that go out and get experience and then apply have better pole position. It was a very competitive program. They get around 200 applications a year, and there's only 5 slots.
Oh, my.
So after my internship at Callaway, then I moved out to the West Coast. I lived outside of Oregon, in Portland, Oregon, for a little while, and worked on a certified organic farm. I started a design-build landscape company. I worked for an organic nursery called One Green World. Amazing plants, lots of unusual edibles, that kind of thing. So it was really fun out there, and I had a lot of great experience. But I did come back to the East Coast to go to grad school in the Longwood graduate program at the University of Delaware. I applied and got in, and started that program in 2002, graduated in 2004. I did my thesis research on the effects of compost on container media. But I knew when I was at the University of Florida that I was going to start my own company, and I didn't know what type. Was I going to start a farm? I started a design-build landscape firm while in Oregon, but that was for someone else. It wasn't mine, for example. And a potting soil company was always on the short list. Maybe I'll do that. I don't know. And when I was out in Oregon, I used to spend my free time, quote unquote. I would drive down to Corvallis, the University of Oregon, and Oregon State. I'd go into the basement, into the horticulture library, and read up on the latest, greatest research going on with container media, potting soil. And, that helped continue to shape and guide what I was going to do. But honestly, once I graduated from the Longwood program, I just decided, look, this is kind of a now or never moment. I'm either going to do this or I'm not. And that was in right around 2005. And, sustainability and green was making it to the front page of Time magazine. The nation, it was kind of like we were starting to ride that sustainability wave. And, LEED was getting more and more popular, buildings and this and that. So I took the plunge and decided, okay, I'm going to go ahead and start this organic potting soil company. There's still not an extremely earth-friendly option for gardeners, back in the early 2000s. So I said, all right, our company's going to be that option. There were a couple, but, our approach is so much more, dedicated to environmental sustainability. We always say one of our core values is environmental sustainability. And so looking at decisions that we make, how is that going to make us more sustainable, more green, so that transfers right down the lane that gardeners vote with their dollars. And if they're choosing sustainable green products, that makes the whole industry, a little bit more earth-friendly.
Well, and I've listened to a lot of interviews that you've given, and you talk about the fact that when you started trying to spread the word about your company, you weren't standing up saying, here, buy this product. You were talking to people about the importance of gardening organically.
That's it. You hit the nail on the head. When I started in the Longwood program, at first I thought I wanted to be the director of education at a public garden because I wanted to help educate people about how easy it is to be a successful organic gardener, and you don't necessarily need all the stuff to grow a healthy plant. That nature, by and large, takes care of most things if you just leave it alone and let nature take its course. And, as I got into it, I realized, so the directors of botanic gardens, they kind of just set policy and they hire other people. They're not necessarily the content expert. And so I kind of did build my career around becoming a content expert in organic gardening. And yeah, that's exactly it. Whenever I'm giving talks, I really like to just talk about, hey, we're going to talk about soil today and what makes for good, healthy soil, or we're going to talk about potting soil today and all the different types of ingredients that go into potting soil and why they're in there. Because I feel like an educated person can then, everyone can make their own decision on what they feel is right or important. And for some people, it's going with the earth-friendly product. Some people, again, now want to go with a vegetarian or a vegan product if that's their thing. Because some people don't even realize, like, oh my gosh, there's animal products in that. I didn't even know. So education is a very powerful tool. So yeah, I'm all about talking about aspects of gardening, not necessarily pushing products, because everyone can make their own decisions on that. And if they, are intrigued by what I was talking about, well, then maybe they are going to go look for Organic Mechanics products. But by and large, it's like, if you can't find Organic Mechanics, I want you to go out and buy the best organic products for your garden that you can. Really high quality compost, good organic fertilizers, those type of things.
Well, as you were saying that, I think two things came to my mind. The first is, that saying ignorance is bliss. I find a lot of times with friends that I meet in the gardening world, ignorance usually means that we're starting out non-organically. We're starting out using chemicals because we just don't know better. So education is important, but also for you, I think this strategy not only, is the core of your value structure for your company, but it really is foundational to building your customer base, because education is a big part of getting people to buy your product. They've got to know why it's important to be organic before they'll even consider buying your product, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I was not an organic gardener at all until I, started learning from other people and seeing the differences between organic and conventional and doing my own research to find out more. And, there's a lot of claims out there about, what it means to be organic and why it's different, why it's better. For me, it comes down to some really simple things that, being organic in the garden is more earth-friendly. It's putting less pressure on our resources. And it's building the soil ecosystem. It's all about building healthy soil. Because if we have good, healthy soil where the microbes that live in the soil are doing their thing, they're going to provide nutrients, they're going to filter out pollutants, which means that the water that's coursing through those soils is clean and good, drinkable water. We're not polluting things. by applying a bunch of pesticides or over-applying fertilizer, because all that stuff is water soluble, and all water goes to the rivers, and so that you're talking about marine health and that kind of thing too. So, I mean, I feel like it is. There are a lot of benefits to organic gardening, and one of the biggest ones from a gardener's perspective is that in the long run, organic gardening is less work, and no one likes to do work in the garden. Being in the garden should be fun. You should be out there playing. You should be having a good time. It shouldn't be drudgery. And I know we've all pulled weeds in the heat where you're sweating and the humidity's up, but there's maintenance. Sure, there's always maintenance in the garden, but by and large, organic gardening, it requires less work. It requires less inputs, which means less money. There's so much more joy. I mean, everybody who sees a bird or a butterfly in the garden, it doesn't matter if your garden's organic or conventional, you're going to smile, you're going to be happy about it. But if your garden is organic, you don't have to be concerned about I just sprayed pesticides over there and there's insects on that, and then the bird came and grabbed the insect. It probably got sprayed with pesticide, and she's going to feed that insect to her baby bird. Or you can be like, if you don't spray at all, then you're just growing food for all the creatures of the world. That there's so many benefits to being an organic gardener, and it really, there's selfish ones, and then there's the greater worldview of keeping an organic, safe space for bees, for insects, for butterflies, for caterpillars, for flies, for beetles, for all the wonderful things that live in our gardens.
As you're talking, I'm thinking about this elite experience you had going through Longwood. Was organic a big focus of your training there?
It wasn't. Really, the Longwood graduate program trains leaders in public horticulture. So I like to call it's like an MBA for nonprofit. Okay. So that program teaches you how to run a nonprofit. We were introduced to a lot of different gardens. We're very blessed here in the Delaware Valley in southeast Pennsylvania, but there's a lot of public gardens in the area. So that program is very much a training program, and so the degree you're getting this MBA essentially for nonprofit. So I almost considered myself getting a dual major. I did it without going after the formal title because I took a lot of classes on plant pathology and soils and a lot of other things. That aspect, was my kind of exposure to the organic world. That and just the research that I did at Longwood, producing their compost, elevating their composting system to produce some really high quality compost. So I did, but by my own education and my own initiatives. The program itself is really more about creating leaders that understand the ins and outs of public horticulture, public gardens.
Okay. So it's kind of a leadership training program in a sense.
Yep, you got it.
Now, every entrepreneur often has a story of the resistance that they faced, the naysayers that they encountered as they were starting their business. And I'm trying to imagine the reaction of your family and friends when you say, I'm going to sell potting soil.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I guess my family and friends, they know me really well, so they all believed in me from the beginning. So, I appreciate all my family and friends very much. But, then you go to these small business advisors, that every county, every state has some kind of a program, like, oh, this is a small business advisory council. And, you go to them, you tell them what you're going to do, and they're like, you're going to sell dirt. And you think you're going to make money at it. They were just blown away that I'm like, yeah, no, seriously, no, I've done the research, and people buy potting soil. What do you want me to say? And there's not a really solid organic option that people can get everywhere. There was a few local regional companies, and we're one of those companies now. Based out of Philadelphia region. But so that definitely met some resistance there. But then I won them over in the end, and I would explain everything in detail, and they're like, oh, okay, all right, well, we can see how this might work. And then the same thing when we finally did get going, but we were, one product, one size to start with. But I thought that garden centers would immediately be like, oh my gosh, this is fantastic. Yes, let's bring this in. We're going to sell it. And I thought, people would just buy it in droves because, why wouldn't you try an organic potting soil if you're, out there gardening and have a lot of good ingredients in it so that you didn't have to go buy all these different things and mix them together yourself. But, rapidly found out that, in my mind, it would be an easy sell to garden centers. But reality was that selling to garden centers is really a tough market. It is not easy to break into these garden centers. And, you can understand some of the reasons, of course, that as they have, whether they're the first, second, or third generation garden center owners. A lot of these garden centers are, a family-run business, and it might be, second or third generation. They've seen changes in the industry. They've seen companies come and go. And there was a time where a lot of the bigger companies just kind of looked at us and they're like, well, yeah, it looks great, but I don't want to bring her a product that then is not going to be available in like 2 years. But then, years go on, and so some customers it's taken, 2 to 6 years to get them on board, but customers of ours learn pretty quick once they start stocking our products, they sell well, that there's no risk really in buying our products if you're a garden center. Well, one thing I didn't anticipate in the very beginning was that like I said, we had one product, one size, and myself, our web designer, the guy, and the VP at the time, my best friend, Jim, the three of us designed this bag. And so it was our first product. And it was a white bag with green lettering. And I wanted it to be kind of classic, like that classic China look with just like ivory, like the white and blue, kind of ivory and blue classic look. We were doing it with like white and green. So we thought it would look great. And we start showing it to the garden center owners, and they're like, oh, that's not a very good looking bag. And, we were like, oh yeah, I know better. I know who our primary target audience is, even though both men and women garden. The primary audience, in the early 2000s, it was women. Women were the most gardeners. They do the most amount of gardening and garden shopping. And so we didn't make that same mistake twice when we redesigned the bags. And we went around the second go. We had 30 women on the focus group to design the bags, and that's the current design that we have today. And most women look at the bag, they're like, I love it. I love this Art Deco artwork on here. It's very classy. And you show it to a lot of men, I'm not trying to generalize, but you show it to a lot of men, they're like, oh, I don't like it. It's not colorful enough. And, it's just like palm to forehead. Okay. But you know what? It does look really nice when you put it next to, plants. So, yeah, in the end, it's all about what's inside the bag. It doesn't really matter what the packaging looks like. In the end, we wanted to make sure we were putting a quality product in the bags. But, that was one of the, resistance things that we met when we were first starting out, that people didn't like the packaging. They were resistant to bring it in because they thought, I don't know if this company's going to be around. But, our biggest asset was the stuff in the bag. And so I just give it away. I'd be like, yeah, try a bag. Put a plant in our soil and then put a plant in whatever soil you sell now that you like and see what happens. And that convinced a lot of people to bring our products in because, at the time, our product in, because, it just grew bigger plants compared to other soils. And that's easy for gardeners to use because it already had the worm casting mixed in and compost mixed in. There's a lot of people might buy just an average bag of potting soil and then mix in some worm castings or compost themselves, which is, it's a great thing to do. I absolutely know that gardeners are tinkerers. They love to play around with things. They love to try new things. And, I'm going to buy this, and I'm going to mix it with that for this special plant that I bought. I love that aspect of gardeners. I love talking to people about their plants, what they do. And, that's the people that are gardening, they're just, people are doing all kinds of fascinating things in the garden world. So I love talking about plants. but at the same time, we also want to make it easy for people to just grab a bag and go, especially the beginners are like, I don't know what I need to be mixing into this stuff. Just, mix it for me and, let me, turn me loose with some plants. So, yeah, that was, I'm sure a very long answer to your question.
Now, let me ask you this. Are people who buy your product, do they become kind of fanatical about it? Like that's the only potting soil they will use and then they rave about it?
Well, I know that there is a little bit of that happens. And, which is great. I mean, if you fall in love with something, well, that's, you're going to be passionate about it. That goes the same for anybody, anything. You have a favorite sweatshirt, you're going to wear that sweatshirt all the time. A pair of jeans, you're going to, you got a favorite smoothie that you like, hey, you're going to stock it in your fridge, and, yogurt, same thing, so that kind of stuff. But, yeah, by and large, when you talk about organic mechanics, the product is a very earth-friendly product, so people who are into, being an earth-friendly gardener or, conscious person with their buying habits, they are going to be kind of drawn to the earth-friendly side of organic mechanics. We did it just because we wanted to do it. And then, yes, of course, it does align with other people's values, which, we just did it to give people an option, that earth-friendly option. Like, look, you don't have to buy it. It is out there that if you want the earth-friendly stuff, here it is. You can buy it from us. And, we like to get it out there for as reasonable a price as we can. High-quality ingredients are expensive, but they're totally worth it. Anything will get you from A to B, but higher quality materials get you a higher quality garden. And so in my case, especially growing your own food, not only do you want it to be organic so that, you're not eating a bunch of chemicals, it also is going to can be, bigger yields and tastier fruit, that kind of thing as well.
So I'm imagining what pressure you might have felt back in 2005 as you're finishing up your degree and you are figuring that you're going to take a run at this market because you've seen a niche that's not being filled at all, and it's organic soil. Did you feel an intense amount of pressure to get going, to be first in the market before other people started coming in?
Yeah, absolutely. Because we knew that, those of us who were getting the company off the ground, we knew that it was only a matter of time. Because you could see the writing on the wall if you were looking, and the companies that had been around for a while were starting to grow. And yeah, there weren't a whole lot of small ones like Organic Mechanics at the time. Since then, there was a point about 3 years ago, probably 3 years ago, at the trade shows that we go to, there was like a dozen new soil companies in the aisles.
Oh, wow.
And we were just like, we were like, oh my God, because people saw the success of companies like Organic Mechanics and others. And they're like, all right, well, we can do that. And, I have said, previously that, hey, anybody who wants to make a go of a small business, more power to them, because it is not easy to start a small business of any kind. Doesn't matter if you're talking about a potting soil company, a landscape company, a restaurant, a catering business, any kind of specialty business, small business, my hat's off to you if you want to go after it. It is not easy. There's you lose a lot of sleep over stuff. You get stressed out. There's no easy way to do it. So yeah, there was a lot of pressure to be first to market, to get there, to establish, to grow as fast as we could, but, healthy, strong growth on 2 feet, not trying to reach for the moon, not trying to overreach and extend ourselves too far. So we stayed very local, to start with, and we've grown now, quite a bit over the past 11 years. But yeah, there was definitely an intense pressure to get to market, and also the intense pressure to do good by the family and friends that stood with me to put money into starting the company. Because I don't have any money, I don't. I don't have any family money. But I did it by recruiting a lot of family and friends and said, hey, we're all going to be part owners of this company. So the accountant loves me because we have the largest stack every year when it comes to tax time because of how many members there are with our company. But, that is how we started. And I will continue to be loyal to those friends, all the way through. So, there's kind of pressure on all sides, but, pressure put on by myself, of course, to do well. But also just company business pressure, like, yep, better establish quick and make a name for yourself because, there's going to be other companies that come along after us. And there were. But, like I said, that was like 3 years ago. Going to the garden shows this year, most of them have already disappeared. There's still some of the newer ones are still around, but I can count 6 or 7 that disappeared in the last year, or and then even more that kind of retreated. So like they were trying to really expand their distribution footprint, but then rapidly realized, oh yeah, we can't do that, and then they had to shrink back down. So, and kind of for the same reasons, they hit the same resistance that I hit when we were starting. That there is resistance to change, and people don't just immediately adopt new things. I'm not a marketing guy. I know there's terms for all that. You have your early adopters, which those are the people that are willing to try anything new the first time it comes out. And those types of people certainly, and that's why there was the rush to get established, because you get all those people on board, and they start using your product, they love your product, and it's, they aren't necessarily going to switch to somebody else's brand, but, they generally will still try something else, because you never know, you don't get to discover new things without trying new things, and, so there was competition, but it's amazing how quickly some of them, the smaller ones, just disappeared already.
Well, and as you're talking, I was thinking about this old mentor that I had when I worked in business for a while, and she said, don't forget that business is all about relationships. So spend time investing in people, as you're building your career. And you created a relationship with Whole Foods, and that was a massive turning point for your company.
Yeah, they've been really good to us over the years. They're one of our biggest customers. It was I always knew that they could sell a lot of potting soil. I'd been in this world, passionate about organics, and saw all these products. I was like, they could sell potting soil, like out front of the store. Absolutely, they could do that. So, I went after them early on, like in 2007. It was kind of random chance that I was in a Whole Foods, and there was they have a community board up, and one of the pages on the community board said, "Do you have a product you'd like to sell to Whole Foods? Guess what? We're having a meeting. Call this number." So,
wow.
Called the number and got a appointment slot. Went in and pitched my, one product, one size, and Whole Foods said, "Okay, we'll give it a shot. You can have like these 3 stores, and we'll see how it does." And it did well. And time year after year, they let it grow. Okay, well, now you can have all the Pennsylvania stores. We'll see how you do. Okay, now we'll give you these 3 states. We'll see how you do. It just grew and grew. We visited every store, treated those stores just like their own independent garden center. And a lot of those stores will go through just as much product as a garden center every year. People know that it's a convenience thing. They can just pick up some potting soil while they're doing their grocery shopping. But yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you that, making connections with people is the best way to move any business forward. With any business, you're only as good as your people that are there with you. That's the biggest strength of any organization is the people that work there. They're a collective body of knowledge, how they work together as a team, that kind of thing. So yeah, we've continued to build relationships. Every customer is an important customer. They're all important to us. Doesn't matter if they're Whole Foods or, a small farm that comes and buys one pickup truck worth of soil every year. Every customer is important, and because everybody's got a story, everybody has a business, everybody has a life, family, and they're all working to better themselves. And so, we're all in this together because, using these products instead of more conventional ones, we're, making the world a bit more earth-friendly, bag by bag.
Well, for folks who are in the gardening space and they have a new product that they want to sell, you would probably advocate getting involved in the trade show circuit, going to trade shows and talking to people, whether they're owners of nurseries or distributors of some kind. That was invaluable to you. How did you handle that? Because that's a grind, isn't it? Going to trade shows and all the speaking and all the standing and the barrage of people.
It is. Basically, in the beginning, I went and spoke at every venue I possibly could to educate people about the benefits of healthy soil. And then by default, I get introduced as Mark Highland, president of Organic Mechanics. And, if I was lucky, somebody at the end would be like, well, what about your products? Where can we get them? And I'd be like, oh, thank you for asking. Yes, because I'm not, like you said earlier, I'm not a blatant salesperson. That's not the point of the lectures, the talks, the workshops. That was to teach people about the benefits of organic gardening. And if they want to learn about our products, well, that's great. But yeah, in the beginning, the first few years, I was clocking between 60 and 90 talks a year.
Yeah, that's
about organic gardening. And that's a lot. That definitely takes a toll on you. I was in the very beginning, I was a single person, even though I was dating my now wife. But I was single at the time, so I could do a lot of traveling. We didn't have kids yet, so that made it really easy. Yep, lots of talks to garden clubs and at garden centers and public gardens. I definitely had the benefit of being in the Longwood program where I met a lot of people in the region, and I knew how to make great compost, and I gave great PowerPoint lectures, and so I got booked for a lot of speaking gigs where it was just even how to make compost, how to make worm castings, and that was a lot of fun, and certainly it is a valuable thing when you're trying to launch a new product to get in front of as many people as possible, to just increase the knowledge and awareness that your new product exists. Because you may have the greatest thing since sliced bread, but if people don't know about it, then they can't buy it, right? So getting in front of as many people as possible, whatever that means to, the entrepreneur, is invaluable. And we definitely, the trade show circuit, because I was going to events when I was in the Longwood program. There's a million events here in the Delaware Valley, but I think there's probably a lot of events for everybody, no matter where you are. If you're in Madison, Wisconsin, or if you're in, Brooklyn, New York, or if you're in San Francisco, or you're in Montgomery, Alabama, it doesn't matter where you are. There's definitely some local horticultural organizations near you that have classes and events, and workshops, and so there's always ways to partner that don't necessarily cost a lot of money, where you can get yourself and your product in front of other people, a lot of those things. But trade shows were definitely where it's at for us. We meet the majority of our customers at these highly targeted trade shows, and there's a million trade shows you can go to. For us, on the East Coast, there's this show called MANTS, the Mid-Atlantic Nursery and Allied Trade Show, which happens in January each year. That's a really big one for us. And then there's another very targeted show called the IGC show, for Independent Garden Center show. And that's in Chicago every year in August. And those are great because you see a lot of our customers, the garden centers, right? So there's a lot of trade shows that you can work, but if it's not your target market, well, you're going to see a lot of people that just pass by, and then that's pretty expensive to just capture, a small percentage of the audience. But just so many trade shows. There's the Atlanta's gift show. New York NYC has a gift show, and there's so many trade shows. You just really have to pick and choose and focus in on who you think is going to have the most amount of your core demographic there. And then that doesn't even count the consumer events and the consumer shows. And I hate that word consumer. I really like the word gardener more, because consumer is just makes me think people are consuming things all the time, and that I hate being referenced to as a consumer. But so anyway, but yeah, the events that gardeners are going to. Like, we have this awesome radio station in Philadelphia called WXPN. You ever hear the World Cafe on NPR?
Yeah.
That lives in Philly. That David Dye. That's a Philly radio show. So they have a big music festival every year, and we did that event for about 4 years, and we had a table, and it was like the Green Pavilion area, and so a lot of the green companies were there together, and that was great. And we talked to thousands of people in those 4 years that we did it. But in year 4, the numbers slowly started to trickle down, and by year 4, I was like, people are just not coming over to this green tent anymore. And those that did, half of them said, "Yeah, we saw you here the last couple of years. Yeah, awesome. Keep up the good work." And then I was like, okay, that's it. We went to this show. We hit it hard. We educated a lot of people, and a lot of people learned about us. But now, let's move on. Let's go do something else for a few years, and then maybe we'll be back to this music event. So you really have to pick and choose. And just because something was working to start with, you can't be too stuck in the rut to think that you can't get outside and do something else, because odds are, maybe there's going to be something else that helps you even more, and you don't know until you try.
One of the things that, as you were talking, I was thinking about all the ingredients that you have to source and be knowledgeable about in order to sell your product. Is there any ingredient in particular that maybe since 2006 you have a different perspective that has evolved in the last decade that, maybe you were high on back in 2006, and now with the benefit of additional information or alternative resources that you've sourced, you feel a little differently about it? Is there anything in your ingredient list, in your pantry of things that you're using to make all of your organic soils that you maybe view a little differently now?
Well, we still use all the same ingredients that we used when we started, but we have changed suppliers over the years. We're always looking to do things to make our products better, to perform better for gardeners. So when we had the opportunity to go with a higher quality compost, we did it. When we had the opportunity to go for a higher quality pine bark, we did it. When we had the chance to go for a higher quality coconut fiber, we did it. Those kinds of things. So I would say for me, it hasn't really changed, although I've become more educated on all these different things. Pine bark is a great example, because composted pine bark is one thing that's used ubiquitously on the East Coast and through the Midwest, really, for growing nursery stock. So if you buy a plant, it doesn't matter if it's a tiny, 4-inch annual all the way on up to a 10-gallon woody tree. If you bought it on the East Coast and it was grown on the East Coast, there's a good chance that potting soil has bark in the mix. Right? It's a commodity item that everyone uses. There's a lot of nurseries that grow woody plants and just straight pine bark. So this is an item that's used ubiquitously throughout the East Coast. It's in high demand. It's a commodity item. And I've learned over the years that there's a lot of different grades of suppliers of this item. Because it is a commodity item and it's in high demand, there are times where there are shortages. There are times when you really have to hustle to secure products. And over the years, there's been other things that have happened where, pine bark is a form of biomass, and some of the state governments, and there was a time when they were essentially giving, subsidies to groups that were converting power plants over to burn biomass. And so the horticulture industry as a whole has the potential to lose the source of one of the greatest amount of material that's needed for potting soil, which is pine bark. And we would be losing that to the power industry if we're not careful, if our industry organizations don't lobby for us correctly, like, hey, that's a resource that we need for mulch, we need it for soils, we need it for all these things. And if the power industry ended up using all of the pine bark that was available, the horticulture industry would be hurting big time, because we'd have to use more expensive ingredients, which would mean the plants would get more expensive, which would mean the gardeners are paying more for their plants. And, that means that people can buy less plants, because there's only so much money that you have every year to spend on your gardening activities. So, it's a ripple down effect that I didn't realize was so strong until we got pretty far into it, and I realized, wow, this is really just a commodity item, and we need to make sure we're buying from high quality suppliers, and try to find suppliers that don't have the pressure to sell to biomass companies. And depending on what state you're buying your products from, some states have more pressure than others. So, I still love all the ingredients that we've chosen, and some of them have just grown on me even more with time. But, we chose ingredients that are high quality, that have a lot of beneficial biology to them, because that's one of the big things about organic mechanics is we're biology-based, organic, so you want the best biology you can get in your soil. The sustainability of some of the other ingredients, the fact that we use rice hulls instead of perlite, and the fact that we are peat-free, and we use compost and coconut fiber instead of peat. So, still like all the ingredients that we have, but we definitely have had an education on some of them.
Let's do a little primer for folks about these ingredients and help them understand maybe the beneficial aspects of them. Let's start with pine bark. What is so great about pine bark?
So you take the bark off the tree, you put it in giant piles, it composts essentially. It's mainly like aging it in giant piles, but the material breaks down, reduces in particle size, so you get pine fines, they call it, or like pine soil conditioner kind of stuff. Not the pine bark nuggets that you might see as a landscape mulch places. These are the aged and fine, very dark in color. So this material is a fantastic medium for plant roots to grow through. Aged composted pine bark has been shown to have a lot of beneficial fungi present. That work was done at Ohio State University by Dr. Harry Hoytink in his labs. So he's now, he's retired from Ohio State, but he did a lot of work there in the 80s, 90s on composted pine bark and how beneficial it is for plant roots. So it's really just aged bark that is really beneficial for plant roots, and it has a low pH, which is nice. The pH of the pine bark helps to balance the pH of the compost, because you really want your pH of your potting soil to be below neutral, which is 7 on the pH scale. So you want your potting soil to be closer to like 6.5 as far as the pH goes. So the pine bark helps with that, balancing out that acidity. It's just a great medium for plant roots to grow in, slightly acidic, has a lot of beneficial fungi present. And that's why we use that.
How about coconut coir? Do you say coir?
People pronounce it a lot of different ways. We call it coconut husk fiber to just avoid that issue.
Okay.
But coir, core, it also comes down to what side of the pond you're on. By that I mean in the UK they all say coir. Here in the States a lot of people say core. But it's coconut husk fiber. If you're not familiar, right, you're talking coconut. Everybody's seen like the coconut in the store, but that doesn't have the shell around the outside, which you'd probably only see if you live in a tropical area, or if you've watched an episode of Survivor, watch them opening coconut. But you have the outside very fibrous material, and then you have the inner coconut. And so you're getting so many different products from one coconut. You get coconut oil, coconut water, coconut meat. There's coconut shell, so that hard brown shell. It's like the classic bowling ball look that kind of you can buy at the store. That very hard shell is heated and made into essentially activated charcoal, then used for water filtration. The long fibers that are on the outside, that's the stuff that's ground up to use to make welcome mats and hanging basket liners. And the stuff that's left over is what they call the pith. So it's dark brown, fibrous, very fine particle material, and that is the coconut fiber that we get. So they take that material, it's spread out on giant pads so that it can be rained on, and so the rain essentially is washing some of the salt out of the coconut fiber. As you can imagine,
that is
coconut
crazy.
trees, right? I mean, it's these giant pads. It's like, you can think of it like the size of an Olympic swimming pool, and it's just full of coconut fiber, and the rain is just washing away some of the salt because coconut trees like to grow near the ocean, so they accumulate salt in their tissues. Salts are not good for plant growth.
Yep.
And so that natural washing process happens for a period of time, and then they move it to a different area that's essentially the drying area, where after it's dried, it's then compressed into blocks. And so we get pallets of these blocks that are compressed. And essentially, when you add water to the block, it expands. And, they expand about 5 to 1. So we get about a half a cubic foot block. And when we expand it, we get about 2.5 cubic feet of the coconut fiber. It looks like a giant brownie when it's done puffing up. So, and then from that point on, it's ready to just be mixed and used in your media. The physical properties of coconut fiber are very similar to the physical properties in peat moss in terms of the porosity, the water holding capacity. Now, these are important elements when you're designing a potting soil. But those are some of the things that you're experiencing as a gardener, that if your potting soil has good moisture holding capacity, well, then you might be able to go longer than 24 hours in between watering. And that also has to do with how big is your plant, that kind of thing. But coconut fiber is very similar to peat moss in terms of what it can hold for water and how much pore space it has for air. Plant need to breathe too. So yeah, coconut fiber, and it's also it's just more sustainable because it is the byproduct after a long string of products that come out of a coconut. And it's also, when it's shipped, right? So it's shipped by boat as opposed to being shipped over the road, burning diesel. So when it's shipped by boat, it's one of 1,000 plus containers on the ship, depending on the size of the ship. So it's very economical shipping by boat, almost like by shipping by rail, which is very economical in terms of fuel efficiencies. So when you compare that against peat, that's why we chose the coconut fiber, because it is very earth friendly, has a lot of benefit to it, and in terms of plant benefit and potting soil benefit, and it's just just more earth friendly compared to peat moss.
Interesting.
So we chose coconut fiber.
Very interesting. Now, do you know the countries that would be like top exporters in that?
Yeah, so you can imagine it grows in tropical areas.
Yep.
So we don't have any here in the States, but it's widely grown in India, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, even Mexico has some coming along. The source quality does vary a little bit from place to place, but those are the primary producers of coconut fiber.
Okay. How about rice hulls?
So the rice hull is the shell around the rice seed, right? So, you crack it open, it looks like two canoes that surround the rice seed. So those are the hulls. Buckwheat hulls are a classic thing that's inside like a travel pillow. These are rice hulls. So they're grown domestically, right here in the U.S. A lot of people are surprised to learn how much rice is actually grown here in the United States, but quite a bit actually. So the hulls are essentially part of the harvesting process. They harvest the rice. The hulls are left over. They then parboil the hulls to get rid of any plant pathogens that might be present, to get rid of any weed seeds that might be present. And then they dry them and compress them and, ship them out to growers and customers. So that it works as a perlite substitute. Perlite's the white stuff in potting soil.
Yes.
Perlite is a mineral, so it's expanded silica ore. It's a very energy-intensive process to make that. You have to heat it up to over 1,400 degrees a few times during that production process, kind of pops it like popcorn, and then you have perlite. So you can tell it's perlite in your potting soil if you take a little piece of that white stuff and then try to squish it next to your ear. You'll hear a crunching sound if it's perlite. And if you hear no crunch and you move your fingers and that thing kind of like pops back up, well, my friends, that is a styrofoam pellet. And yes, there are potting soil companies that put styrofoam pellets in their potting soil because styrofoam pellets are cheaper than perlite. So you do have to watch out for that. But we use it as a perlite substitute because it's earth-friendly. It'll break down eventually and disappear in the landscape, whereas perlite just blows around in the garden. You can see that white stuff forever. It's more energy efficient to use that, and just it performs really well in potting soil, and you can use less and still get the same amount of drainage, of porosity. So that's a win-win as well. It does break down over time, but the trials we looked at in the very beginning, plants grew for a couple of years, and we'd slice open the root ball and look. And the rice hulls on the outside of the pot were somewhat still there, not all broken down yet. On the inside of the container, the rice hulls were gone, but left behind was this beautiful pore space where the bacteria in the soil had eaten away the carbon of the rice hull. And they leave behind these very sticky substances that help to build healthy soil. So in that process, the hull was gone, but the pore space remained. So they're just really fantastic for potting soils. So the rice hulls, you can use them in soil, but they're versatile as well, that you can use them for weed control. And there's more and more big nurseries that are doing this, which is fantastic because it's reducing the amount of herbicide that they have to spray in the nursery, which is a win-win on all counts. So if you see a plant that has a bunch of like yellow-looking grass seed on top of the pot, those are rice hulls. And that nursery is growing those plants and not using as much herbicide. So if there's a nursery that doesn't have the rice hulls versus one that does, you're voting with your dollars to choose the nursery with the rice hulls that's using less herbicide, which is making for cleaner waterways and a lot of other benefits. So look for that at your local garden center, and they're fantastic for cutting out weeds. You got to have it about an inch or more thick for weed control in a pot. But when the USDA was doing that research to determine will this work for weed control, and they found out it would, they did this research in a greenhouse because it's controlled conditions, and they discovered, these plants are the only plants in the greenhouse that don't have fungus gnats. So they realized it's also very effective at keeping fungus gnats from climbing up and out and becoming established in a home, in a container. So when you're bringing in plants at the end of summer and they're going to take their winter homes in your house, put a 1/2 to 3/4 inch layer on top of the soil, and that'll keep the fungus gnats from going in and out. Rice hulls feel nice and fluffy in your hand if you grab a handful of them. You squeeze them and they kind of push back on your hand a little bit, kind of a tribute to their fluffiness. But if you're a fungus gnat trying to climb through that stuff, your wings are going to get snapped off in a heartbeat. I mean, it's just very difficult for an insect to get through this dry layer of rice hulls. And if you didn't know, fungus gnats love to lay their eggs at the top part of the soil, where they then the larva of the fungus gnat just eats your plant roots. So if you have a dry surface layer, it really deters them as well. So it's a 1-2 punch to deter fungus gnats from getting established in the garden.
Oh, that's great information. I love that. And I am going to start incorporating that when I bring my plants in the fall, because I always put my house plants outside. A lot of them just hang out under the deck away from the sun, but they love the humidity and the just wonderful Minnesota summer under my deck. They're a little sheltered, but then when I bring them in, I have to deal with the little gnat issues. So I love this idea. I ran into rice hulls at a nursery in town here. I had gone to I think it was like a holiday container workshop, and they were having us top dress with the rice hulls because they just looked pretty. It was a nice way to kind of top dress. But I love the functionality here, and they're not cheap. At least at this particular nursery I was at, they weren't cheap to buy a bag of rice hulls. Are they? Do you find them to be a little bit expensive, or not necessarily?
Well, we have it as a retail product. It comes in an 8-quart size or 2 cubic foot size, and we tried to price it so it would be pretty close to the bag of perlite that you'd be buying in its place.
Okay.
So, for anybody who's in our area, they can find ours. It's pretty competitive next to a bag of perlite. It might be $1 more, but for the earth-friendly aspects of it, I would argue that it's worth it. But it should be pretty close. But certainly perlite's not cheap either. So in the grand scheme of things, perlite's actually a bit more expensive for the grower. But for the gardener, it should be priced pretty similar on the shelf if they're looking for it.
Okay. So the key takeaway here for gardeners that are listening is that they can use rice hulls in place of perlite if they want to.
Absolutely. For that and for weed control in pots, it looks very nice, as you said. It's a very cool use of it. And for fungus gnat control. Yep.
Okay, so let's talk about worm castings. Yep. What are your thoughts on this?
So it's a phenomenal ingredient for potting soils. That's why it goes in every bag that we make. The benefits of worm castings are the biology is the number one benefit. There's just incredibly diverse beneficial biology in the worm castings. And worm castings are a nice way of saying worm poop. So kids love it when I do an event at a school, or they come up to us when we're working an event and I show them the stuff. I'm like, this is worm casting. And they look at it and then they want to touch it and they're like, yeah, it's worm poop. And then they either really want to touch it or the hand immediately springs back. And I'm like, no, seriously, it's okay. You can touch it. It's not like cow poop or something. These are worms. But generally speaking, all kids love to put their hands in worm poop and then be like, I touched worm poop. It's a kid thing. But plants love worm castings. It is amazing if you do it without. To prove to yourself how well worm castings enhance plant growth. So we put them in every blend just because they are so phenomenal for increasing plant growth, and they just have so many awesome compounds in them. There's auxin, cytokinins, and these are the things that really push plants to grow faster. So you get the biology. There's a lot of other really good stuff in worm castings too.
So how about compost? That gets listed as an ingredient in some of your products. What is compost to you? Well, how do you guys define that?
So because I did my master's thesis on the subject of compost, I am very particular in what we call compost. So the compost that we buy is commercially made. So that means that it's hitting the right temperatures to kill off any disease pathogens, plant diseases that are in there, to kill off any weed seeds that are in there. And it goes through a very specific subset of temperatures during the turning process, because you got to turn it frequently when it's hot. And it's very hot in the beginning after you build the piles, and then the temperatures eventually come down after about 8 weeks. And usually by 12 weeks, the temperatures have stabilized right around room temperature, ambient temperature kind of thing. With the piles maybe somewhere between 80 and 90 degrees, more of like a ambient temperature in the summertime. And then over a longer period of time, it can cool down even further, and it'll just be sitting at whatever temperature it is outside. But composting needs to go through a very specific set of temperatures to really drive the biochemical process that happens during composting, where materials are broken down to the point where they're unrecognizable from their original parts. So if you throw in, I put anything just about in my compost pile, like wine corks go into my compost bin. And, when you're sorting and screening that compost later, if you can still recognize the wine cork at all, it needs to go back into the bin for another round when you're screening out your finished compost. And I guarantee you, after a round or two, it'll be gone. You won't be able to notice anything that resembles a wine cork in there. And the same goes for other biodegradable things. I've tried composting cups, like just your standard coffee cup you get at your local whatever. Like around here, we have Wawa.
Yeah.
You can try compost, and they disappeared. But the thing that was left behind was that the very thin plastic layer that exists in every coffee cup, so that your coffee doesn't leak out and go everywhere by the time you get to work. And there's a tiny thin layer of plastic in there that'll stick around. It's not, plastic's not compostable. Only that PLA stuff that's made out of corn is actually compostable. And even then, that kind of stuff isn't really compostable in the backyard. Not very well, anyway. If you, in your composting activities in your backyard, if you're getting steam that comes out of your compost pile, you are doing phenomenally well. Pat yourself on the back right now if you've ever seen steam coming out of your compost pile. That means you're doing a good job, you're mixing materials correctly, and you're getting a temperature gain in your small backyard pile. Because most backyard situations are actually just aging organic matter, is what I like to say. Just because if it's not being commercially done, it's really just kind of aging organic matter, which there's nothing wrong with that. Aging organic matter in the backyard, you're keeping it out of the landfill, you're making your own soil amendment. That's a win-win in my mind. And yes, it's just easy to call it all compost, but for me, if it's not commercially made, you're just not going to get the same benefit out of it, the same biology, the same disease suppression, because well-made compost can help suppress plant diseases in soil. So you don't get all those benefits unless it's commercially made. So shouldn't prevent you from doing it in the backyard, because it's absolutely necessary and crucial. Everyone should be composting in their backyard and then using that compost in the garden, because it is some of the best amendment you could possibly get. You made it yourself. It's worth your time, but it is essentially free stuff. But yeah, not all composts are made equally. And if it's important to you to know what your compost is made from, then you should ask your supplier what the compost material is made from. Because if you don't want to use compost that's made from sewage sludge, for example, you need to know what you're putting down. If you don't want to use compost made from, the city's leaf collection program, because you're concerned about the leaf collection machines sucking up a bunch of oil or whatever else, then, you need to know what your stuff is made from. Compost, I can't get enough of it. I love to mulch my garden with compost. So that way, I just always forget to get a little something to mix into the planting hole. I get so excited about the plant that I have, and I'm going to put it in the ground, and like a raspberry plant. No, I'm going to get raspberries next year, and I'll get the thing in the ground, and then I'll realize I forgot to go get any kind of amendment whatsoever to put in the planting hole. But if you have compost as your mulch, it's all right there, and a little bit of that is going to get mixed in when you're just planting it. So, but I love compost as mulch. It's feeding the soil while it's breaking down. Generally speaking, it's pretty fine, so you don't need a whole lot of it to get the mulch job done. It's dark, so that absorbs heat well, so it still helps kind of heat up the soil. Compost, you're feeding the microbes in the soil, you're feeding them organic matter, so it's another win-win.
Well, one ingredient that is not in any of your products is peat. Help listeners understand why that is and why that's so important if you're an organic gardener.
Well, so peat moss is harvested out of the ground from peat bogs. And, peat bogs are a very unique ecosystem. Very unique plants live there. So peat bogs are the home of Venus flytraps, pitcher plants, sundews, all the carnivorous plants, and a whole host of other plants as well, heath, heathers, that kind of thing. So peat bogs are a very unique ecosystem. It's a natural product that's derived from plant parts that break down over time and get compressed in the bog. So if you leave peat alone long enough, 8,000-9,000 years, it turns into coal. So peat builds up at about a millimeter a year. And so you're building up this material about a millimeter a year because this stuff has got to break down, got to decompose, and it's little bits of stems and twigs and leaves and ferns and mosses and all kinds of things that grow and die each year, but then they're building up layer after layer every year of older material that compresses and eventually becomes peat. So peat's in the bog, and there's different grades or quality of peat as you go down through the bog. The youngest stuff at the very top is lighter in color, and as you go down through the peat bog, as you harvest more peat, you're getting into the darker materials that are more aged, and they have different properties. So the peat industry has been around for a long time. It really got into full swing in about the 1950s, when the peat light potting soil was developed by University of Santa Cruz, University of California, and Cornell developed this peat light mix. And people found that, hey, this makes great potting soil. And it does, and it is a natural material harvested out of the ground. So technically, so it is 100% organic. However, there are alternatives to peat moss, and when you look at anything in life, if there's a more sustainable alternative, why not consider it? And we have compost as an alternative that we can use to peat moss. Compost is made locally from materials that are essentially waste products that need to be disposed of. So why not turn that waste product into a valuable resource, i.e. compost, and then use that in your garden instead of peat? Because peat has to be harvested out of the ground, which requires a lot of energy, diesel energy, to do that. Grade it, process it, package it, ship it over the road, burning a lot of diesel the whole way versus compost, which is generally, again, made locally. So there's pros and cons to using it from a transportation and harvesting perspective. From a gardener's perspective, peat moss does break down rather quickly in a pot. Anyone who's ever had a hanging basket, by the end of summer, you put the hose or the watering can on it in the morning, and you've only dumped maybe a gallon's worth of water on that hanging basket, or a half gallon, or what, and it's running right out the bottom of the pot. You think, oh, well, my plant is watered. Look, the water's running through. When in fact the peat moss kind of shrinks in the container, and so the water will just go around this cube of peat and then go out the bottom of the pot. So it doesn't absorb water very well by the end of the season. The pH can swing wildly and go much more low than that optimum that I was talking about earlier, up right around 6.5. So the pH can go pretty low, which plants don't like that either.
Okay.
Peat doesn't have the beneficial biology that compost does. Compost has fantastic beneficial biology. So those are a few of the reasons why we choose to use compost instead of peat moss.
Okay. Now, you started out with one potting soil mix, and then you decided you didn't want to be a one-trick pony, and you started offering many different products. Do you want to walk us through your product line?
Sure. The premium blend potting soil was the first item. The second item we made was the container blend potting soil, because we did find that some people really wanted a potting soil that was more similar to the peat-based mixes they'd been using.
Okay.
And so the container blend is very well drained. It's very similar to peat-based mixes. So the container blend is our all-purpose outdoor potting soil. And the premium blend is for indoor houseplants or any place exceptional moisture retention is needed. So you got a 4-inch window box that dries out every day. You got to water it twice a day. You can try our premium blend. It'll probably go a day or two in between watering. Vegetables also do really well in the premium blend because it has more compost, more worm casting. The container blend potting soil is more well drained. It has more rice. It has rice hulls in it, and it has more coconut fiber, less compost. So those are our first two products, and then we developed a planting mix compost blend. That's for building raised beds, or if you need to amend soil, if you have really poor urban soil, etc., where the soil is just really bad. The planting mix compost blend is for that. So for building raised beds, we recommend mixing it with topsoil about 50-50.
Okay.
The topsoil is great because it has clay in it, and the clay does a lot of really good things for the soil. It increases your water holding capacity and nutrient holding capacity. That's for building raised beds, the planting mix compost blend. And then after that, we launched our seed starting blend. Pretty self-explanatory there. It's for starting seeds in containers.
Yep.
And then where did we go next with our product line? I think then we launched our worm castings. So we do 1 and 5 pound bags of worm castings, and by themselves, like I said, you can mix them into other soils. They're a phenomenal houseplant fertilizer, plant booster, because they don't smell bad. They smell nice and earthy. A lot of organic fertilizers don't smell great.
Okay.
They might smell a little fishy or a little mealy. And so it's a great kind of a pep up for houseplants to put about a quarter cup of castings on a houseplant.
So do I have to mix it in? I've never done that before. So do I have to mix it into the houseplant, or do I just put it right on top?
You can put it right on top because when you're watering in your plant, that'll slowly, work it in over time. So that's fine. Just put it right on top of an existing house plant.
Does it kind of revitalize them, or what does it do for them?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it'll green them up and gives them a little boost because the fertilizer value in castings is negligible, but it's the biology that's there that can produce a little bit of fertilizer over time, kind of consistently over time. Because the biology that's in the castings is living, growing, dying, reproducing, and that cycle repeats over and over and over again. And the action of them doing that, whether it's they're getting eaten by a protozoa or their nutrients are kind of leaching into the soil itself, that's where the extra value comes from. But the worm castings are phenomenal at building soil structure, for the same reason I described earlier with bacteria eating the rice hull and leaving behind these sticky substances that made the pore space stick around. So they're great at building soil structure. So that's a wonderful reason to add them to your mix or look for a mix that has worm castings in it.
And so just to recap, if people were going to do that and buy this worm casting mix from you, or it's just solid or 100% worm castings, how much would they add to, let's say, just a typical house plant in an average size pot?
I'd say about a quarter cup a
Okay.
plant. And, when you're planting annuals or vegetables in the garden for the year, same thing. You put it, at most a quarter cup per plant is a nice little boost right in the root zone at planting time.
All right, that sounds good.
So there's worm castings, and then we made our mulch product. I never thought we'd be making a mulch, but customers were asking for it, and people buy it. It's not the cheapest mulch on the market, but it is 100% organic, so a lot of people do dig that aspect of it. It's made with bark fines and compost. We mix the two together to make the mulch. So it's a very fine mulch. You only have to use about 1 inch or so to achieve good weed control. It stays dark because it has that compost addition to it. It doesn't fade over time. And then after the mulch, we made We also have pure rice hulls. I mentioned that earlier. We do that as well. We'd already talked about how to use those.
Yep.
We made our cactus and succulent blend, and it's also based on the United States Botanic Gardens recipe for succulent. Cactus and succulent is a huge category now, so that's one of the ways we develop new products is by watching trends, seeing what's really hot, and okay, cactus and succulents, why not?
Sure.
Very different than most of the mixes that are on the market now. They're just basically peat and perlite. Our mix has some chunkiness to it. It's got sand and shale and some biochar in there. It's getting rave reviews by all the Cactus Society folks that are in our region. So that's a pretty new product as well. We developed our Root Zone feeder packs. So that is going to be, it's a great item. It's basically every feeder pack has the following ingredients in it. It has biochar. There's a huge dose of mycorrhizae, tassamite, oyster shell flour, and there's also a 4-2-2 starter fertilizer in there. So the biochar and the mycorrhizae, those are yield boosters that really help push plant growth. And the azomite and the oyster shell, those provide trace minerals, a lot of calcium. So you just use one per plant, and it's so easy to use because you take the pack, it's in like a tea bag format, and you put it right next to the root ball at planting time, and that's it. And then you finish your planting, and it's so easy to use. It's a feeder pack. We gave it the name Forget About It. It's so easy to use. You just put it down there and forget about it.
Now, do you have to tear the pack open, or you just literally throw the pack in and the outside dissolves? How does that work?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of people ask that. You can just put the pack in the ground right next to the root ball because that packet will degrade pretty quick.
Yeah.
The biology will eat it away. So when you pull the tomato or pepper plant or whatever it is out of the ground at the end of the year, in many cases in our trials, the roots had grown into and all around that feeder pack, and it was still stuck to the roots like a big chocolate candy bar.
Oh, interesting.
And,
okay.
Definitely, in all cases, you want to grab that off the roots, throw it back into the soil. Because biochar is essentially, in terms of a human lifetime, it's a permanent soil amendment, the lifetime soil amendment. And we've done a lot of work with biochar over the past 7 years, to the point where we launched our first product with biochar, which was the feeder pack. We also put it in the cactus blend. And then one of our new products for this year is a biochar blend.
What is biochar? I have to stop you. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, so I'll give you the quick version because we could have another hour conversation just about biochar. But it's essentially pure carbon that acts as a battery in soil. Once you charge it up with water, nutrients, and beneficial biology, it then becomes a source for the roots as the plants are growing, especially in times of stress. So biochar makes nutrients work better, more efficiently, and it's a yield booster. There's a lot of scientific research about biochar. It's based on the terra preta soils of the Amazon that are carbon dated and still there, still functioning. When those soils are 2,000 years old, that carbon that's been there, it's still present.
Wow.
Hasn't gone away yet. So
that's impressive.
It's really good stuff. It's with biochar, it is a pretty young industry. So just like not all composts are made equal, not all biochars are made equal. Some biochars that are being sold are very high pH, very low, can be very low carbon content. In my opinion, you're looking for that carbon content because that's where the biochar really hits the road. But yeah, it's a yield booster. It's a plant growth promoter is the short story. So you're adding it to your soil at very low rates to get a boost in productivity.
I'm imagining your place where you're putting all of these ingredients together, and I'm thinking about quality control. I'm assuming you use your 5 senses to, check out product when it's coming in, but then you must have some type of scientific instruments or whatnot that you're using to make sure that the ingredients are quality.
Yeah, so we work with our suppliers extensively on that, and they're vetted quite well before we start using them. Their products. So yeah, there's a lot of testing that goes on before we start using. In the process of considering a new supplier, all of that gets extensively tested, and we're doing soil tests for nutrient content, heavy metal content, pH, biology, biological contribution to the mix. All that stuff gets tested, and then we do periodic spot checks on soils and batches that we're running, so that we know where we stand in terms of nutrient content and pH, to make sure that we're on track, make sure that there's not something randomly going wrong with any one of the ingredient, any one of the raw ingredients, raw materials. So yeah, we do. There's definitely a lot of testing, and a lot of our products are OMRI listed. That's the Organic Materials Review Institute, OMRI, and they're an independent third-party verifier of organic products. So just like when you go to the store and buy organic milk or bread, it's got that USDA organic seal on the product. The OMRI seal is for garden products. So if you're looking for organic gardening products at your garden center, if the product has the OMRI listed logo on it, then you can buy it with confidence and know that even if you had a certified organic farm, you could use that input on the farm and wouldn't risk losing your certification. So that OMRI listing requires extensive testing. So our products are tested even further than most to verify the organic claims on the package.
Wow, time and money, I bet, to get that listing.
It is, but we feel it's worth it. And customers have responded. It was not widely known when we first started with it, but now it's definitely much more known and accepted as a qualifier for high-quality organic products.
So how about your remaining products? You have tea bags and you have plant foods. Walk us through those.
Yeah, so we have partnered with a company called Sustain, and we use their fertilizers in our seed starting blend, for example, to give the plants a little boost, little seedlings. And they came out with a retail line of fertilizers, and our customers have been asking us, hey, when are you guys going to do a fertilizer? Well, a fertilizer plant and a potting soil plant are very different animals, and there was no way we were ever going to start a fertilizer plant. That requires a whole other investment. So when friends of ours at this company made a retail-ready line, we thought, hey, we would absolutely love to carry that and offer it to our customers. So they're OMRI-listed fertilizers. One's an 824, and the other one's a 464. So the 824 is your all-purpose lawn and landscape. The 464 is for fruiting and flowering plants.
Okay.
But really easy to use. They're non-burning, short-term availability, so they're only around for about 45 days. But the compost tea bags are super easy to use. You take one compost tea bag, drop it in your watering can, let it sit there overnight or while you're at work. You come back to it, you just pour off that liquid compost tea, and plants get a nice boost out of it. You got to use it all up in just one shot, and then you take that soggy tea bag. I would always tuck it into whatever planter was closest on my deck, because there's still a lot of fertilizer value to it. It doesn't all go into solution. So, it's kind of like double duty, but great fertilizer. Really helps to grow solid plants. Doesn't matter if it's vegetables or ornamentals. Good stuff.
I love that little tip about kind of the repurposing of that. That's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it still has a lot of value to give. But you could also put it in your some people put it in their compost pile, which will help. It'll help the compost break down. So.
Well, I'd read online that your company went through a terrible flood a couple of years ago.
We did. Yeah, it was 2014. It was May 1st. And if you don't know, the two busiest weeks in the garden world are the 2 weeks of the build-up before Mother's Day, because a lot of places, at least in our neck of the woods along the East Coast, Mother's Day is like the last frost-free date. That day you can plant for 99% of the time. You can plant your tomatoes and your petunias, your annuals and vegetables outside without worrying that it's going to frost anymore.
Okay.
So very busy time of year, but we had we've gone through many a storm, and this hurricane was passing through, and it dumped a lot of rain on us, but wasn't anything that we hadn't seen before. But unfortunately, the reservoir that was upstream from us, it was not owned by the municipality, it was owned by private hands, and they made a decision to release floodwater from the reservoir, and the people who were downstream were affected, like us.
Oh.
We were right along the beautiful west branch of the Brandywine River, very idyllic, but at the same time, we were directly in that water's path. So the water rose 3 feet in 30 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
We did notice we got lucky that we saw right when it started happening, so we were able to get all of our team out of there, out of harm's way. We got everybody's cars out of the way, because if we hadn't have acted, everyone's cars would have been toast. Because it was 3 feet of water that came over the banks. And the reason why we know it was the privately owned reservoir upstream is that there's a USGS, U.S. Geological Society station on the river right next to our property. And you can go online and see the data, and the water temperature plummeted over a course of 30 minutes and just went way up. So those two things alone are what we can recognize that it wasn't just storm water. This was a release from the up the way. So, but like I said earlier, it's all about your people in any organization. And our guys were troopers. They came in. We cleaned up. We lost tens of thousands of dollars in product because we had to get rid of all the raw materials. We had to restack every pallet that got flooded out because the bottom layers of the pallet were toast, and the top layers are still fine. They didn't go underwater, but we had 16 inches of water in our entire shop and warehouse, and so we had to get rid of a lot of product and start over. And we dug out and scrubbed that warehouse top to bottom, just like you would after any major flood event. According to FEMA guidelines, pressure washed the whole thing twice, and brought material back in and started back up again.
Wow.
So we were down for about 9 days. It was like May 1st to May 9th before we started back up.
Is that probably the most adverse situation you've had to face in your business, do you think?
Yep. That was it for sure. Yeah. I definitely don't want to go through that again. We didn't have flood insurance at the time. We were a small company, and we thought, we don't need flood insurance. But now we have flood insurance. So if it happened again, we'd be financially okay. But that was a big hit to our little company that still had a ripple effect, even till today. But for the most part, we're moving beyond that now.
Wow. And so you said the peak time is the 2 weeks before Mother's Day, and this really had to be just the worst possible timing for you guys.
Worst possible timing. Lost a lot of potential sales because a lot of our customers, we're a bit more nimble than the big companies, and we allow our customers to buy on a just-in-time basis. And if you want to buy 2 pallets every week and then sell it on the weekend, and then buy 2 more and sell them on the weekend, we let a lot of people do that, and we're known for that. Because otherwise, when you work with the bigger corporations, they require you to buy a full truck, and that's a lot for some of these little garden centers, and that's all they need for the whole year, kind of thing. Whereas with us, we're flexible, and you sell out of one size, not the other. One popular at one size, more popular than the other one today. Oh, great! You can buy whatever you want, and that way you're keeping only what you need in stock. So we were used to that, but we just lost sales that we couldn't gain back at that point, because once the time has passed, And
Yeah.
If telling the customers like, we're so sorry, we'll get it out as soon as we can. I mean, they understood, and which is great to work with understanding customers. But at the same time, customers are in their store. Customers need something to buy. They're just going to buy something else because yours isn't on the shelf and available. So once you miss the sale, you can't get it back. It's not like people go into the grocery store every week and they're buying milk every week. So, hey, they didn't buy it this week, whatever. They're just going to buy it next week. Once you do your gardening, it's kind of like, well, I don't need any more potting soil,
Yes.
So, yeah, it was not fun, but thankfully we made it through and had a lot of support from our customers. We did an Indiegogo campaign to try to offset things a little bit and offered a lot of really great things to people that supported us financially. But that helped out a little. But mainly that just paid for the cleanup. So, because it was quite expensive because we had to rent machines but our family and friends came to our rescue, and we had a crew in there, like 17 people one day helping to clean. It didn't work for us. They just came in to help. They were friends of our employees, friends of mine, it was really nice to see the community come out and help us.
Amazing. Wow. Well, Mark, I can't thank you enough for all your time today, not only sharing the story of the company, but helping us understand a little bit more about your organic soil and things we should be looking for, understanding those ingredients better. I think it'll make us all better gardeners. And when we're thinking about additives, things like rice hulls or worm castings, these things can make a huge difference. And for people who are committed to trying to go organic this year, they can really make it a lot easier transition, maybe easier than what people realize. So I can't thank you enough. This has been really wonderful.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, I was really stoked to hear from you and to come talk about gardening. Like I said, I always like talking about gardening with other people. And anytime you want to talk about soils, because I'm sure, we've scratched the surface today, but I know that there's a couple other channels that you have to keep the conversation going. So
yeah,
I'm all about it.
That sounds great. Now, do you have any parting piece of wisdom you'd like to share with folks about going organic this year, about trying to have an organic experience for their garden in 2017? Any pieces of advice or experiences that you might want to share with them that they can benefit from?
I would say that pay special attention to the soil, because it is all about having good soil to have that beneficial biology working for you, because they are tiny little workers doing the work for you, so you don't have to work as hard. Mm-hmm. They make their own fertilizer. They keep plants healthy. So start with the soil. Make sure that you're mulching with high-quality materials, that you're treating your vegetable gardens well, adding high-quality compost to that every year. Make sure you're fertilizing organically, because the combination of organic fertilizer with organic soil amendments is the best combination to really spur plant growth. Biochar is an amazing soil amendment. I highly recommend people try it, because it's the real deal for improving yields in the garden. So biochar is absolutely wonderful. But another big thing about being organic is, I realize that none of us like to see insects in our garden. And, whenever you do see insects in the garden, give nature some time to get in there and take its course. Just because you see aphids doesn't mean you have to go grab a jug of something that'll kill them and spray them with it. Because odds are, if you leave them alone for long enough, the lady beetles will come in, lay their eggs, and then you have lady beetle larvae running around eating them, or something else will come along and eat them. Nature exists as something's providing food for something else. And, if we don't spray in our gardens, you're going to get more butterflies laying eggs. And just because you see a caterpillar munching on something, unless you know what it is, please don't kill it right away. Because what if that was a tiger swallowtail and you just killed it? You could have a tiger swallowtail flying around your garden. If you have kids, that's even more cool. Because what if you see the chrysalis and then you can see that hatching? Being an organic gardener is about working with nature, understanding the ebb and flow, the rhythms of nature. And when you do that, not only do you gain a greater appreciation of the natural world, but you can see these things happening in your garden that they don't cost you a dime. You just have to wait, be patient, to then witness some of these amazing things that can happen. So that's my other big thing with organic gardens, is that a lot can happen just by nature taking its course. And I understand if it's your prize rose and it's covered in aphids, well, you know what? A good stream of water is going to knock most of them off. And same thing, if you see cabbage loopers on your brassicas, well, of course, don't wait. Just pick them all off with your fingers and then maybe get some BT to hit it with, which is an organic control. But there's lots of ways you can control insects. You don't always have to just spray poison on them. So yeah, work with your soil, work with Mother Nature. That's the best way to be an organic gardener with less input and, greater yield and higher satisfaction.
Well, I'd love to hear anyone say sharp streams of water. I had talked to Shane Smith of the Cheyenne Botanic Garden, and he's also the gentleman that wrote some of the earliest books on greenhouse gardening. When I interviewed him, that was the first thing he said, and it's always stuck with me. And so I still use that method to this day, just sharp streams of water on my plants when I have issues. And when Japanese beetles were on my arbor going after my grapes and my roses, I would just go out there at dusk and early in the morning and do sharp streams of water. And within a couple of weeks, that problem was completely gone. So that was great.
Right. I mean, if you're a Japanese beetle and you're getting sprayed with water all the time, you're going to go find someplace else to eat your lunch,
Yeah.
You're not going to stick around. So, and same is true for spider mites. You can blast them off. It messes up their life cycle. There's a bunch of things that's good for. Yeah, right on.
Well, I appreciate your time today, Mark. This was just wonderful. And look forward to seeing you in the Facebook group for the listener community. That'll be great.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks so much. Well, that's it for the show today. I want to thank Mark Highland of Organic Mechanics for being my guest. I want to thank the ladies on my listener advisory board. These are 6 women that volunteered to be on the board for a quarterly assignment through May. And of course, I met them through the Facebook group, and their suggestions and support have been top-notch. And they are Beth Engel, Denise Pugh. Denise gardens in North Mississippi and is a contributing writer to Mississippi Gardener magazine. Amy Fairbanks Von Atchen, Patricia Chandler Newport. She's the owner of Backyard Urban Gardens, and she's out of Kego Harbor, Michigan. Deb Gibson, and Peggy Ann Montgomery of American Beauty's Native Plants. And Peggy was also a guest on the show talking about native plants. I also want to thank my team at Podfly Productions, David Myers, Ein Kadena, and David Gregerson. This is my team of an editor, a copywriter, and a project manager. And without these guys, I just could not get my show out consistently every single week. So rain or shine, they make sure that the show gets published, and I can't thank them enough. Just a reminder that I'll have all of the generous information that Mark shared over at my website at 6footmama.com. That's the number 6. FTMAMA.com, and it's the home of my podcast, Still Growing. And when you head over there, just click on the menu and it'll say podcast, and right there you'll see the show notes for this episode and all of the links that Mark mentioned, as well as the links for all of the articles that I mentioned in the Garden News Roundup. It's all there in the show notes. And while you're there, click on the Facebook group. It's right up there in the menu. It says Facebook group, and it'll take you right to the group. And then you can just click to join. I'd love to meet you in the Facebook group for the podcast. And if you don't find it on my website, you can always go to Facebook and search Still Growing Podcast Group, and our group will pop right up. Well, by the time this show airs, I should be 3 weeks post-op. My recovery should be well underway, and I'm hoping to be resuming my regular daily activities, albeit left-handed. I'm confident I'll manage. I hope you guys are having a great time picking out your veggies and your plants for your 2017 garden. It's an exciting time of year. Have a great week, everyone. Still Growing with Jennifer Eveling is a 6footmama.com production made in lovely Maple Grove, Minnesota. Still Growing is a weekly gardening podcast dedicated to helping you and your garden grow.